Hello and welcome back to Cosmic Nebula. So, in today's video, I wanted to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI. So I planned on talking about this for a very long time. It's been on my list for a really long time. And recently I've been making a lot of videos regarding like fat acceptance and obesity and weight. And I know that a lot of people really like those videos, but the reality is we cannot always talk about the exact same thing. So in today's video, I'm going to give you my opinions on DEI. And if you don't know, I am a black woman, but even though that's true, I don't necessarily agree with DEI for a lot of reasons, even though I think it has some practical application. And I think that there exist scenarios in which it could be effective, but I think that in practice, it is often used in a way that is completely ineffective, thus making it a waste of time. So in today's video, I wanted to react to this video that I found on TikTok about a man. I think he said he used to be a human resources person and he supports DEI, and he's going to explain to us why he thinks DEI actually works. And then I'm going to negate him by stating why, in my experience, I think DEI most definitely doesn't work, even though it definitely could work.
Initiatives from a corporate perspective is really not smart because DEI was actually created to protect companies. And I know a lot of people think that this is what DEI is, that companies are basically...
That's what it is. I don't understand what he's saying. That's what it is. Like, everybody isn't misunderstanding what DEI is. This is literally what it is. In cases where I have personally seen it, a lot of DEI is basically hiring people for very specific reasons, like being a woman, being black, being a black woman, right? Being gay, right? Being transgender, etc., etc. We can say, oh, they shouldn't be doing that, but that's oftentimes exactly what they do, right? And so it doesn't really matter what we feel like people should be doing. It only matters what people actually do in practice.
Hiring people just to check off boxes of marginalized communities and say that they have a diverse staff. But
they do it all the time. Knock it off.
That's not how DEI works.
That's exactly how DEI works. That's how it works in practice, right? I understand that in theory it shouldn't work that way and people should put a lot of effort into it. And maybe this man puts a lot of effort into it, but the reality is that anytime I've ever seen DEI in practice, it has been done in the exact way of checking off a fucking box. And what you get is you get people put into certain jobs in certain positions that they didn't earn, right? And then they don't suit that position. So you have all of these people who are completely unprepared and incompetent in a certain job, and they get to keep it, right? They get to have it because nobody wants to say anything because they would be going against social politeness norms. And so nobody wants to be the bad guy and say it out loud. But again, maybe this man is not the type of person that misuses DEI, but he at least has to fucking know that a lot of people often do.
I know because I worked in HR for close to 10 years where my sole responsibility was hiring people, and DEI was actually one of the metrics that I was measured on my performance on a year-to-year basis.
It says, even before my corporate job, I hired for many clients who were Fortune 500 companies.
And over the course of my career, I hired thousands of people, so that's where my knowledge comes from. So in my last video, I talked about how it's illegal to hire someone just because they belong to a marginalized community. So when you hire...
Yeah, nobody does it directly, though. Nobody says, I'm going to hire this person because they're black. They don't say it like that. But unfortunately, human beings are generally cognitively lazy, so they make shortcuts. So while they should go through this really elaborate, well thought out, detailed assessment of the person, reality is a lot of people don't want to do it. And so they will just fucking pick anybody, which is why you have all of these disabled people, binary fucking people, women, fucking black people, people of color, Asians, you name it. You have all of these people who get picked for jobs, and because they are mildly incompetent, they are completely unaware of the fact that they don't fucking have any competency in that job and they have no business in it. And so they think that because they have been placed there due to DEI that they deserve it, and then you just get a clusterfuck of an idiot thinking that they deserve a job that they clearly are not cut out for. Again, it's illegal to say I hired this person because they are black or because they are gay or because they're a woman or because they're disabled. It's illegal to say that, but oftentimes people do it.
Someone, you're only supposed to base it off of two things. The first being their qualifications, so their past job experiences or their schooling in relation to the job description. And two is supposed to be your assessment of that specific person and how successful you think that they're going to be in this position. Now, the second criteria includes things like, does the candidate have the right personality that's going to make them successful in the role? For instance, if you're trying to fill a sales position, ideally someone who's an extrovert is going to be more successful in that role than someone who's an introvert. And it also includes other criteria that are relevant to the job. Like, for instance, with that sales position example, if you're trying to fill a position that's going to be working in a territory that has a lot of Spanish-speaking businesses, then you might be helpful to have someone who speaks Spanish because they're going to be able to communicate with the customer base a lot easier. But it also includes things.
But just because they speak Spanish doesn't mean they are Hispanic. People, first of all, Spanish is not a hard language to learn. Plenty of non-Hispanic people speak Spanish simply because they grew up in a Spanish-speaking country. It could also be that they grew up in a Spanish-speaking region. It could also be because they studied Spanish and they lived abroad for a long time, right? If you are a native English speaker, learning Spanish isn't even hard. But I get his premise is that he's saying that we hire based on their qualifications and likelihood of being successful in the role. But the reality is, for certain jobs, when you follow these rules strictly, right, like qualifications and likelihoods of success, what you get is it tends to be a lot of people of the same group testing into that job, right? You will get a lot of men who are white in a lot of fields, in a lot of sectors. You will get a lot of men who are white who will test into those roles, right? So in order for you to quote unquote diversify, you have to unfortunately select people who do not fit the majority and give them a job. Now, does that mean you need to give it to a person who is not qualified? Of course it doesn't. But again, if you have 100 candidates for a job and fucking 90 of them are white men, for example, and only 10 of them are women or people of color or disabled or of different genders, what have you, guess what? It is more likely for you to find a person to fit the role perfectly in the 90% than it is for you to find it in that 10%. So because those numbers in a lot of fields are already quite small, the pickings are very slim anyway. And so what happens, unfortunately, is that people often give jobs to people who don't fucking deserve them. And we all know people like this. We all have worked with people who have clearly been given jobs based on DEI and they have no fucking competency in it. Now, do I think that there are definitely situations that people end up in where they don't necessarily have access to certain spaces and certain areas and certain opportunities? Yes, but I think that those people have to be able to show that they possess the skill set, even though they might necessarily not have the experience. And in order to ascertain if that is true, you have to put a lot of effort into assessing that person. Human beings, they love to look at things from this idealistic perspective where they have this idea like, we're going to do this assessment on this person and we're going to filter out all of the bad eggs and we're going to pick the perfect diversity hire, and this person is going to be super skilled at the job and super qualified at the job, and we are going to continue to assess and assess until we find that perfect candidate. And even though that's probably what they should be doing, oftentimes people don't do it because hiring another person is fucking exhausting. And so what they do is they just pick somebody who seems like they're good enough. And oftentimes what you find is that they're not good enough, unfortunately. And if it went based on just pure meritocracy, you would not see a lot of these people in these jobs. And this is why when Trump issued the order, overturn diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring, and companies started dumping them, this is why you saw so many people of color especially being cut from their jobs. It was not the case that you were an asset to the job. They were just keeping you because they needed to satisfy, unfortunately, some kind of quota. And now that they don't, they get rid of you. And again, if it is the case that you got in based on that, and then you proved that you deserve to be there, they would have kept you. But what you often see is a lot of people, like I said, because they are not qualified for the job, the same thing that makes them unqualified for the job also makes them unaware of their lack of qualification for that job. And so when they get cut, they love to blame it on sexism, racism, all of the different isms, right? They love to blame it on that when in reality it's just you lack the competency because you were given something that you didn't have to work for, even though you should have never been given it. And I'm not necessarily blaming the person who benefited from DEI unfairly, but to some degree, you have to essentially prove yourself, and a lot of people simply don't. And we all have direct experience working with somebody who has a job they fucking shouldn't have, and they create a lot of fucking havoc.
It's like the culture fit and how they're going to fit into the culture of the company and how they're going to gel with the rest of the team. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a gray area where a lot of potential discrimination can take place. And when a company commits to DEI, they're essentially just committing to the fact that during that second criteria part of assessing candidates, that they're not going to be discriminatory. Let me give you some real life.
They are discriminatory though, but they're discriminatory in a positive way, I guess. Right? They are positively discriminatory towards certain types of people. For example, as a black woman, what I often see when it comes to DEI hiring of black women is that you see people trying to take black women who are not culture fits for certain environments. They don't possess the cultural capital to be in that environment. And you see them trying to basically let the person in, again, even though the person doesn't suit it. And what I mean by that is you will be working in a certain environment where you have to have the cultural capital to move among a certain type of people. Let's say a white collar job, right? People love to talk shit about stuff like code switching, but the reality is that even white people code switch. When they are at work, they speak a lot more politely than they do when they're at home, right? They don't have the exact same personality when they are at work that they do when they're at home. So there is an element of code switching when it comes to like a professional white collar job environment, especially like a corporate company and not like a really small company. There is some degree of code switching you have to engage in, and this goes for everybody. But what you'll oftentimes see is they will hire, for example, a black woman who is a little bit too street, a little bit too hood. The way she speaks it's not code switched enough, right? It's insufficient. As I said in another video about a black woman who went to Europe and she took all her ghetto-ness with her. The ability to speak properly and speak clearly in certain environments is very important. And when you cannot do that, it shows your mentality. And you often see a lot of black women who got their education right and they still talk like this while rolling their fucking necks. And they're ignorant as fuck. And you see them in jobs, in my opinion, they shouldn't have because they don't suit the culture of that job. And what I notice is that oftentimes I think that other races of people, they feel like they're giving the person a chance, or they feel like they're trying not to be discriminatory. And in trying not to be discriminatory, they are essentially being discriminatory by allowing a person that has no business being in a certain space into that space for the sake of satisfying a diversity, equity, and inclusion clause in their company. So I understand what he is saying. I get it. In a perfect world, everybody would do everything perfectly. But in reality, it almost never happens. And I don't understand why he's trying to pretend like it's otherwise when it's not. And you oftentimes also see a lot of women in jobs that I don't think suit women. Like a lot of leadership positions. I'm not going to say women can't be leaders. They can be. But most people aren't leaders. And that goes for most men. But what you will see is a lot of women in leadership positions where they have no ability to deal with confrontation. They have no ability to deal with uncomfortable conversations, right? They have no ability to deal with any kind of insubordination. All they value is harmony. And it's like, if you are that type of person where you need to be liked, you have no business being the leader of anything, because that's just not what a leadership job is. But you will see a lot of women of all different races in leadership positions simply because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as a woman, I don't think that they deserve to be there because it makes women as leaders, period, look ridiculous.
Examples of how DEI works. For instance, I sat in on this panel interview where it was me, another HR representative, like the actual representative that you go to when you have problems at work, and the hiring manager. So the person that the person will actually be reporting into when they get hired. And after interviewing a bunch of candidates, I started to notice that the HR representative was asking every single candidate what they did on Sundays, and then I noticed that they were writing down notes on their resumes. So after like the 7th interview, I asked the HR representative, hey, are you just asking them what they're doing on Sundays for conversational purposes, or is there an actual motive behind it? And the HR representative responded to me by stating that they were asking candidates what they were doing on Sunday because they didn't want anyone who was religious. And when I asked them what their reasoning was, they stated that they didn't want anyone who was religious because then that meant that they had prior commitments and they wanted people who were going to be gung-ho for our company. And I had to tell this HR rep that they couldn't do that because one, not only was it discriminatory and they were opening up the company to discrimination lawsuits, not to mention I told them that their whole psychological assessment for which they were not qualified for could be wrong in the first place, because having someone who's very religious could be a sign that they are good at and have a pattern of behavior of committing to something and showing up for it regularly.
Yeah, he's right, but guess what? Notice how his coworker was trying to sift somebody out based on discrimination, right? Again, companies do this all the time. It's not necessarily that they don't want somebody who goes to church and who is religious. They also don't want people who have boundaries. A lot of companies, they sift out people who have boundaries, people who go home at 5 p.m., exactly at 5 p.m., people who refuse to work extra. Companies do this shit all the time. They will test candidates to see how weak-willed they are and how easy they are to control, right? A lot of companies do not like proactive people. For example, right now, I'm dealing with my university, and universities are bureaucracies, right? And because universities are bureaucracies and because they are public entities, they are essentially like mini governments. And so what I have learned is that in this little mini government, even though technically they have a bunch of supervisory positions and leadership positions, and these fucking people make $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7, $800,000 a year, they make all this fucking money to do these bullshit administrative jobs. Even though that's true, guess what? Because they are a public university, they are not really that accountable for anything. So in a private company, your supervisor, your manager will hold you accountable often. And if you didn't do your job properly, they would report you to human resources. But in a bureaucracy like a public university, a lot of the supervisors, they don't report their employees. They don't ever hold them accountable for anything. They might get caught doing something they're not supposed to be doing, and they'll basically self-correct quietly within their own unit, and they will never actually document it down at human resources, which is definitely not something you're supposed to be doing. But I say this to mean that a lot of universities, what they do is the culture basically sifts out anybody who is proactive, anybody who is hardworking, anybody who has a high level of integrity, etc., etc. What it does is it sifts in people who are extremely compliant, who will do what they are told, who will not question anybody, who will not rock the boat. That is what that environment selects for. And so this hiring manager doing that, while technically it's illegal and it probably would have never been actually written down anywhere, companies do it all the time. They do it all the time. So this man, again, he is ignoring the fact that while he might have good intentions and he might actually do his best to like find the ideal candidate, a lot of people don't give a fuck. They will just pick anybody. Okay, we need somebody who's gay. Okay, and they'll just pick anybody, qualified or not. And that's why DEI often doesn't work. Oh, we need somebody who's disabled. They'll just pick any fucking disabled person. And then you'll have this disabled asshole who doesn't deserve a job, working a job and being incompetent, and nobody's allowed to say anything to them without looking bad. And then the company can't get rid of them without risking a lawsuit. DEI in most instances does not work the way this man is saying that it should. And he is being, to some end, facetious about that.
If one of the candidates found out that we were asking candidates that question as a qualifier, we would have opened up the company to so many class action lawsuits. And part of the reason why DEI was one of my metrics for my performance every year was because I had to educate myself every year on the changing laws of discrimination and diversity so that I could protect the company from making sure that we weren't practicing discriminatory hiring practices and open ourselves up for lawsuits.
Yeah, but you can only get sued if they have a record of it. Now, if that person had written down, I'm asking people this question so I can determine whether or not we should hire them based on whether or not they're religious. Yeah, you can open yourself up to a lawsuit, but guess what? A person's interior motivations that they don't write down or express outwardly, you can't prosecute that because there's no evidence of it. It doesn't matter what you feel like or think they were doing unless you have video or written documentation saying that this is the metric that they were using to filter people out. You can't do shit. So while I do understand him as a human resources personnel being like, hey, don't say that shit out loud. You can't do that technically. Yeah, at the end of the day, people who are smart, they'll just keep it to themselves and then they'll continue to do it because they can and nobody can stop them. which is why, again, a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring is blatant. People just pick anybody because they don't want to waste their time, because at the end of the day, they feel like it doesn't matter because they're just checking off a fucking quota. So I feel like this video is, to some degree, is dishonest. He is ignoring the opposite opinion. He is thinking that because he feels like personally it should be done a certain way, and because he has always done it a certain way, that does not cancel out the fact that a lot of people don't fucking hire in this way. Human beings are by their nature extremely biased. They are extremely biased. But at the end of the day, jobs should go to people who deserve them, who worked hard for them, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion, and regardless of their fucking gender or any other kind of metric. And unfortunately, what you will find in a lot of instances is that a lot of jobs filter out women, and it also filters out people of color for a variety of reasons.
And I've had to have similar conversations with hiring managers and other people within the organization about veterans, women, and many other groups. Yes, DEI occurs outside of hiring as well. For instance, DEI initiatives is the reason why women got breastfeeding rooms inside of the offices and everyone got phone rooms, so that people felt comfortable knowing that they can take personal time and personal calls at work without fearing retaliation. But from a hiring perspective, DEI is put into place to help protect companies from discrimination lawsuits. And yes, HR is there to help employees, help them grow, and help them with any issues that they have while working. And while
That's a lie. That's a damn lie. I hate people like this. This is why people don't like people who work in human resources, because they never tell the truth. You know good and goddamn well that human resources exists primarily to protect the company, and I think that's fine. That's a fine job to do, right? But you know that that's your job. You are not there for the employee. You are there to protect the company against any kind of employee conduct that could cause a lawsuit, or against any lawsuit that an employee could initiate against the company. That's your job. I don't know why people in human resources work so fucking hard to deny that that's their goddamn job. And they always say the same bullshit. We're here to support you in anything you want. You're not. Knock it off. That's fine, right? It's fine for you to do your job in that way and hold people accountable. I think it's fine. But I really don't understand why they go so far and go so hard trying to convince people otherwise. When we all know what the fucking truth is. I understand holding people accountable, making them accountable for their job, protecting the company, never being on the employee's side, only protecting employee rights to the degree that it benefits the company. That's fine to have that role, but stop lying to my face about it.
Companies will tell you that HR is there as a resource for employees. HR professionals know that one of the biggest responsibilities of all HR professionals is to protect the company that they work for from employment law.
Exactly. That's their only job. That's their only job. And again, kudos to him for doing that, right? If you don't have a job, do it right? You don't owe employees anything in the execution of your job because they understand what your position is, right? All human resources does is protect their employer from lawsuits and from compliance problems. That's all they do. So when employees bring issues to HR only intervenes because they don't want it to turn into a lawsuit later. It's not because they are on the employee side. They do not give a fuck.
In compliance issues. And the reason why you go to HR representatives when you have an issue first is because their job is to try to talk you down from suing the company. That includes during hiring. And when a company says that they have DEI initiatives, it's a lot harder for someone who claims racial discrimination to state that they are being racially discriminated, because the company can easily come and say, but look, we committed to DEI and look at all these DEI things that we're doing, which is why it is absolutely unintelligent for a company to drop and get rid of their DEI initiatives, because it leaves them vulnerable to discrimination lawsuits.
I disagree. I don't think that discrimination lawsuits are that fucking easy. Knock it off. Knock it off. I don't think you cannot file a lawsuit against a company without evidence. Like, you would need evidence of them hiring people based on race in order for you to be able to sue them. You can technically start a lawsuit against them, right? You can technically go down, file the paperwork, start the lawsuit. You can technically go to court, pay the lawyers, whatever. But unless you can prove it definitively that they only hire a certain type of person for a certain type of reason, for example, gender, sex, race, whatever, yeah, you don't really have a leg to stand on. And in most cases, for example, in the case of that hiring manager, they asked the same question, what you did on Sunday, and they noted it down. But I highly doubt that they had records written down that said, what does this person do on Sunday so I can filter out anybody who's religious? I highly doubt that they had that written down anywhere. Therefore, you would not be able to prove it, right? They could, again, be like, oh, I'm just asking what they do on the weekends so I can see how dedicated they are to the company in case we need their help on the weekends and we can put them on call or call them or whatever. And that, again, is not the same as racial discrimination or religious discrimination. That person who said that was really stupid for saying it. But again, I don't think that DEI is needed. It's really not. Unfortunately, it's not. I understand why DEI became a thing, and in a perfect world where people use it in the correct way to give opportunities to people who have the skill set for it, the personality for it, the character for it, the ability for it, the work ethic for it, but they have not been given the opportunity due to certain specific hardships that certain people experience. If that was the way DEI was used and that was the only way DEI was used, I would support it. But like I said, human beings take cognitive shortcuts and they give out jobs to people who don't deserve it. And you see this a lot when companies lay people off. I remember once I saw a video of a bunch of Google employees being laid off. And if you watch TikTok or Instagram, you know that I think in 2024, you saw a lot of fucking companies, like young employees who work at Google, like, come to work with me. My day in the life of a person who works at Google, or a day in the life of a person who works at Microsoft. And you had all of these like young Gen Zs, young Gen Y people working in these offices, and basically you saw them just bullshitting around most of the day. And I saw a video once where a girl, she had like moved to California, moved to San Francisco, got a house, yada yada yada. She was having fun, living her best life, working at Google in California. And apparently Google laid off her entire like division. And so she's on the phone with her manager, and the manager's like, oh yeah, well, you know, they laid people off randomly. And it was just like a random layoff, and like people who got fired, it was for no real good reason. And I'm just like, no, that's not how companies fucking work. They do not lay people off randomly. They go down a list and they list whether or not you are beneficial to their company or not. And when they got to your name, they decided that you don't provide any skill that another person cannot provide tenfold. And so they got rid of you. That's how it works, right? But these people were working real fucking hard overtime to deny the fact that they got let go because they were not beneficial. And you saw the same thing when Trump issued an order to stop DEI focused hiring. You saw a lot of Black women being let go from jobs in large amount of numbers. Again, if you get in because of DEI, yeah, you should probably work really hard to show them that you deserve to be there, because I highly doubt that they fired everybody simply because they were hired through DEI. They fired them because they hired a bunch of fucking people through DEI, and when it came down to it, none of these people were an asset, right? Because they have a habit of giving employment to people who are not fucking assets. Unfortunately, there is a reason why a lot of Black people are not in certain positions, and it has nothing to do with opportunity, because you have Black people that come from poorer countries to the United States. They get their citizenship, they work hard, work up, and they work into these fucking positions at a higher rate than American Black people do. For example, right? You have a lot of instances in which men work harder and longer hours and are willing to put up with a lot more shit and get a lot more qualifications than women are willing to do. And so you have a larger skew of men in certain sectors. It's not because women don't have the opportunity to go into these places, it's because women choose not to go into them for a bunch of different reasons. And whether people like it or not, men and women biologically make different decisions on a macro scale, even though technically men and women have the ability to make the same decisions. And do I think culture has something to do with it? Sure. Society has something to do with it. Pressures, expectation, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, DEI doesn't work. It doesn't matter how we feel like it should work, what we think it should work. In a perfect world, it will work this way. People simply don't do it. They don't do it, and then all these fucking piece of shit DEI hires get into fucking jobs they don't deserve, and I fucking hate their guts. Nothing is worse than having to witness some idiot in a job that they got due to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then you have to put up with it. You have to sit around and watch them be bad at everything and you can't say shit about it. And everybody just sits there and grits their teeth. And then the person in question, they get to basically do a bad job publicly in front of other people, and everybody knows about it, but nobody says anything. And it becomes synonymous with this group of people are just incompetent. So you see that a lot, where black people in certain spaces in general are seen as incompetent, not because there doesn't exist any black people who can do the job well, but because hiring managers and human resources, they often take cognitive shortcuts and they will give the job to anybody who is black just to get it checked off the list, because that's the easier thing to do than hiring a person that has the qualifications and deserves to be there. That would probably take a much longer amount of time. Anyway, I'm going to stop the video here. I want to hear y'all opinion on DEI hiring. Do y'all think it should be done? Do y'all think it shouldn't be done? This video is probably long enough, so I will see y'all in the next one.